Thank you for having me back at this fabulous reading series. So my short story collection centers around the partition of India and Pakistan, which happened in 1947 when the British left India and split the country into two countries. And in that process, for those of you who don't know, 8 to 10 million people estimated were displaced, forced displaced from their homes, and over 1 million people died. So it was incredibly traumatic and continues to be an incredibly traumatic time in that region's history and currently. So I'm going to read from a short story called Kavita Mustafa. The train stopped abruptly at 3:36 p.m. between stations, 20 miles from the Indian border on the Pakistani side. Kavita looked out of the window in the heat of afternoon and saw only scrubland, an endless yellow plain of dust and stunted trees, as far as the eye could see. She knew what this meant. One of the men in the berth, the tall one Kavita had been eyeing, calmly told the women to take off all their jewels and valuables and put them in their shoes. They'll search everything, he said with meaning, which made the young woman in the corner blush. 2 or 3 of the women gasped. The old lady started crying. There were 11 people crowded into their berth, including Kavita and her husband, Vinod. They were all from Islamabad and had been squeezed onto the wooden ventilated train now for 7 hours. There was an older couple that seemed to be traveling with their middle-aged son and his wife. The young woman in the corner was traveling with her mother and older brother. And the tall man was with his son, or so Kavita presumed, though they looked nothing alike. The boy was now more than 8 or 9 years old, but out of all of them, he seemed to remain the calmest, even more so than his father. He serenely took out tooth and pebbles, a curl length of twine and a chit of paper, maybe a photograph, from his pockets and put them in his shoe. There were 4 of them. The one who entered the berth first had distended ear, fanned out like a cabbage leaf, and was clearly the leader. He stepped inside, holding a machete by his side, by the handle, swinging it like a spray of flowers. The others crowded behind him, holding sticks and one a metal rod. Now there were 15 in the berth meant for 6. The heat growing even more unbearable, and the middle-aged man, the one who was there with his wife and his parents, lunged with a cry at the metal bars of the train's windows, trying to loosen them. It was pointless. They were welded in place. His wife and mother tried to calm him, but he was weeping. "Look, how sweet," the leader said. "We have a baby in the berth." The leader smiled serenely, looked at each of them in turn, then put his hand on the shoulder of the man at the barred window and said, "Here, let me help you." The man, with a tremulous look, his face stained by tears, his hands in shirt front, stained by the rust from the window, turned and looked at him. "Come, come," the leader said. "Let me show you the way out." He pushed the others aside and led the man to the door. The man, still shaking, the surprise of being led from the berth, hardening into flight, took one quick look at his wife and parents and bolted out of the berth. Cabbage Leaf smiled. "You see how easy that was?" he said. They stood in silence. "Would any of you like to leave?" he asked. A fly buzzed. They waited motionless, as if they had all anticipated the sounds of the scuffle that reached them from the other end of the bogie, followed by a loud thump, a scream, and then a strange and preternatural quiet. The old lady, the mother of the man who left the berth, let out a long, piercing wail. Now, the leader said, "there's no need for that." Then his voice dropped. It grew fangs. "Your jewels," he said. The middle-aged man and the mother of the recently departed man wept silently. It was odd, but it was only now, only after there was one less person in the berth, did a pall descend on the group. They moved slowly, the shadow of the train lengthened, the August heat was oppressive, Sweat trickled down their faces, their clothes stuck to their bodies. Flies entered the berth in droves, but they were too scared to swat them away, to make any sudden movements. Kavita licked her lips and tasted salt. "Hurry up," the leader said. The 3 other men were outside the door, standing guard, Kavita assumed. The leader, though, watched the passengers keenly. Each of the women had left a small piece of jewelry visible, so they wouldn't suspect the ones in their shoes. Kavita had left her earrings in, the young woman her nose ring, the middle-aged woman and the elderly mother a few bracelets. They took them off and placed them in a pile on the wooden bench. Cabbage Leaf looked at the pile, shook his head and laughed. "I know you have more jewelry than that," he said. When he finished laughing, he said, would you like me to help you look?" The women glanced from one to the other, then they looked at the men. Cabbage Leaf, whose name was Ahmed, Kavita had heard one of the men guarding the door call him that, waited patiently. When no one moved, he placed his machete next to the pile, seated himself beside it and said, "I'm going to enjoy this." Then he wrapped his arm around the waist of the young woman standing closest to him and pulled her onto his lap. "Yes, I am," he breathed into her neck, pulling her chunni off her shoulder. The brother of the young woman lurched forward. His mother caught the very end of his wrist, but he slipped out. It didn't seem possible in such a tiny space with so many people crowded into it. But it seemed to Kavita that he sailed across the berth, his arms reached out as if to strangle Ahmed. But Ahmed was quicker. He swerved to the sides where the brother landed in a heap against the seat. In a flash of metal, one of the outside guards, the one with the rod, swung at the brother. All Kavita heard was a thwack of metal against bone. The brother let out a howl, gripping his arm. Blood spurted from the wound. His mother knelt next to him, using the pallu of her sari to staunch the blood. It wouldn't stop. It was now covering the floor of the berth, pooling around their shoes. "My shoes," Kavita thought. "Get him out of here," Ahmed growled. "We have enough flies as it is." The guard went into the passageway and yelled for help. Another one of the guards came in, and he and one of the metal rod dragged the brother out. He whimpered as he left the berth. "You see what happens to heroes," Ahmed said. Their berth was the last in the bogie, on the far end, next to the lavatories. Kavita, seated next to the door and directly across from the little boy, caught a glimpse of the tiny steel sink that was used by the passengers to brush their teeth. And it was against this sink that the brother was propped up. Blood was still pouring out of the gash on his arm, and she wondered if he might die. She looked up, and the little boy was watching her. There was, she noticed, intention in his gaze, and she only looked away when Ahmed addressed her. "You," the leader said, pointing to Kavita, "give me that." She had forgotten about her Mangalsutra. She'd swapped out the gold chain of her wedding necklace for turmeric-soaked thread just before the trip, for safety's sake, but the round lockets were made of gold. How could she have forgotten? She slipped it over her head and handed it to him, but no one seemed to wince. Was it for her or for the gold? Ahmed bounced it in his palm, the wedding necklace she'd not once taken off in 10 years, up and down, as if weighing the gold. And then she felt a thrill, a rush of heat flooding her body, to think that a man, any man, held in his hands the warmth of her body. Thank you.